Hello and welcome to the Wake Up Podcast by Veeam, a global leader in data resilience. My name is Caroline Wong, and today I'm joined by Michael Irwin. Michael, welcome.
Thank you.
We're here today to talk about an experience that you had. I wonder if you can kind of lay the framework for us. What was the context?
So at a high level, we dealt with an incident response kind of engagement within a previous organization that I worked with. Incidents or events are not something that's particularly uncommon, but sometimes they end up a little bit bigger than the typical one. And in this case, this was an incident that was attributed to a nation-state actor. It was something that saw a pretty significant spread through the organization I was working at. There was a lot of impact from a user perspective. Fortunately, we were able to contain it very quickly. We were able to contain it in a way that remained confidential to the organization. We protected the data that was there and really had a successful outcome in that context, but it was still a seven-figure engagement with outside incident response providers, and it was something that really caused a lot of heartburn within the organization for a period of time.
Knowing that you get events and minor incidents all the time, what was the first thing that happened that kind of tipped you and your team off, like something is not quite right here?
So I think what tipped us off is often the case in those smaller events also, and you don't really know what you're going to deal with until you start kind of getting under the hood a little bit more. In our case, we did a lot of geolocation monitoring of accounts. So we have a US-based workforce. It's generally unusual for international activity on their login accounts. And so when you see that sort of activity, often it's in the form of failures or attempts to access accounts. In this case, we saw some successful activity, we did some more evaluation, and then you start looking a little bit deeper and you say, this is an employee that, as an example, may live in California, and they have a whole lot of login attempts from Chicago. Well, that's unusual. It doesn't hit the alerting systems that we have, but it's still a trend that doesn't really make sense. And so when you start digging into that more, you find IP blocks that are associated with VPN providers, and it really just starts looking more and more suspicious. And I think once you have a couple of those indicators, whether it be IP ranges that you know to be bad, or IP traffic or something in that space that you know that you're attributing to the event, you start finding more examples of it across the organization, more examples of different users that have similar issues. And that's really the aha moment where this is a bigger deal than a typical event.
You know, just hearing you describe that, I can kind of feel my heart rate start to rise. I wonder if you could walk us through, what was that experience like? What was your nervous system doing as at first you're kind of like, all right, this person in California, there's a little blip over here in Chicago, and now it's kind of blipping some more. Tell me about how the escalation occurred and what it felt like.
Yeah, I think it's that fear of the unknown is what plays into it a lot. So you have that moment that, okay, this is bigger than a small incident. You start seeing more people impacted. You know there's going to have to be some actions that are taken from it. And the stress of that unknown is really what gets to you a lot as you're trying to work your way through it. So in the moment, I kind of attribute it to when you're a kid and you kick a soccer ball in your house and you break a vase and you're desperately trying to fix the problem before your parents find out. It's that kind of aspect of, can I get a control? Can I get a handle of this issue before it becomes a bigger thing? And as you start uncovering more and more issues, as you start uncovering more and more things, you realize it's something that's really extended beyond your control and something that really has become this bigger issue. And so at that point, you start pivoting towards the outcome of it. What does this mean for me personally, for my career, things like that, for my team? And so a lot of the what ifs start coming into play.
What was the moment when you knew it was bad?
When I knew it was bad, I think it really has to deal with the number of users that are impacted. So you start looking at privileged accounts, obviously is a big concern that you start looking at service accounts that are used in various places. When you start finding evidence of activity in those places, the potential damage or the potential downside becomes so significant and so severe that you really have to deal with it in a larger way. So when I'd say really the biggest example is when you extend beyond a typical user account, user privilege that you can kind of control and put bounds on a little bit more, that's really where you notice it kicking off at a higher level.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, you're talking about users and the number of users is increasing. And tell me about you and the feeling of responsibility and accountability in your role as this is unfolding.
Yeah, so I'm in the unique position for most of my career to being responsible for both IT operations and cybersecurity. And many people would say that doesn't fit with best practice, that that's not something that you should do. I find that it's really effective in a lot of ways. But what it means is that there's two sides of my responsibility. One is the guidance and the kind of awareness of risk, the communicating things that need to happen, risks that exist in the organization. And the other is implementing the solutions to those risks. And so when you're controlling an IT roadmap on one side, you might be aware of a cybersecurity risk, but you're weighing the implementation or the resolution to that with a variety of factors and a variety of things that need to be resolved. And I think that's really where that association comes to from me, is the ownership of both sides of the coin.
Michael, in this situation, you've got a very important role. Who are the other people that start getting looped in as the event evolves?
So it's really addressed in stages. You have an internal response team that in an organization that's smaller or a little bit less mature or smaller budgets that generally consists of teams of subject matter experts across IT operations. So we bring those people in quickly. We start uncovering and understanding what's going on. And then it's really when you need to engage outside providers to bring a subject matter expertise that you don't have, particularly in evaluating logs, behavior, who did what and when, that's where other people get involved. Obviously, when you start engaging in that way, legal becomes a component, cyber insurance becomes a component, those sort of things.
Yeah. And what's it like for kind of the inner circle of in-house SMEs that you're bringing in? What is the experience like for these folks? I'm sure they're getting pinged by you all the time, every day, but there's got to be a switch where at some point it's like, uh-oh. And I wonder if you can describe what's the emotional experience like for those team members?
For the subject matter experts across IT operations that come together, I think it's more of a disruption to their workday. They're expected to work really long hours really quickly. That comes with the territory of a lot of IT roles, and particularly in cybersecurity positions. But it's something that's still quite disruptive. There's a lot that needs to get done really quickly. You're really uncovering kind of the past ills of those teams. You're uncovering the tech debt and the legacy issues that we wish we had resolved sooner. So there's a lot of things kind of bubble to the surface during those moments. So I think for those teams, there's a lot of stress about that because you're dealing with compromised accounts on things they're responsible for. So there's an ownership to it that's stressful for those groups. And then the cybersecurity team itself, obviously, you need to wrangle those people together. You need to understand what's going on and move forward, particularly in containment, because these sort of issues aren't about resolving or remediating in the moment. They're about containing. It's about getting control over the environment, locking out the bad actors that you're dealing with in that moment, and then really start working your way forward.
When you're moving through response and containment actions and you're engaging with legal, you're asking someone for financial approval to engage with a third-party vendor on an unplanned budget item, are you getting support? Are you getting pushback? What are sort of these stakeholder responses looking like?
It's in the moment. Generally, it's all support. Everyone realizes the importance of what's going on, whether they agree with why it happened in the first place. There's generally a unanimous opinion that it's an important thing to do, and we need to invest in and solve the issue. I think things like incident response retainers help a lot in these spaces because it removes some of that initial hurdle. If it's budget that you've already engaged, it allows you to get the process started in a much more kind of pain-free way. But generally, executives at an organization, they want to know how much in total is this going to cost me. And when we're dealing with incident response, there's an unknown capacity. It's really a time-bound sort of engagement. And so it's something that's really hard to say, I almost need a blank check for the foreseeable future to solve this problem. And I think that's what causes the majority of the stress at those levels.
Yeah. And what about engaging kind of externally? Was there a point at which you have to kind of break the news directly to customers? Are you interacting with public relations or external media at any point?
So I think it really depends on the type of incident you're dealing with. In my particular example, it's something that we were able to keep confidential, keep internal to the organization. It was something that did not impact customer data. It did not impact personally identifiable information or things that by law or by regulatory requirements you have to disclose. When you're not a publicly traded company, you have some gray area there of what you have to do. And so for us, we were fortunate enough that we were able to contain it. We were able to to control the situation in such a way that we could keep it within the organization. And part of that is a testament to controls that we did put in place already. It prevented this bad actor that's moving around the organization from getting to that level where it becomes a bigger deal in that sense.
Without sharing any confidential information, I wonder if you can tell us about the impact of the incident. How bad did it get? And how would you describe the badness?
So I think the badness, so to speak, in that sense is about the amount of people that are impacted. So when you're dealing with user accounts, you deal with people accounts, things that are associated with employees. You deal with accounts that are associated with services and applications. When you cross that barrier into the latter is when you start getting into an area that you don't have as much information about. So you might have a service account that's in source code of an application. It's not easily resolvable. And so if you have a credential that's compromised, the biggest problem in that space is not knowing how immediately to solve it because of what it might break just by the nature of trying to deal with that. And so in this sort of case, there were a lot of employee accounts that were involved. It was a pretty widespread user base, but the remediation of that or the containment of that was not all that big of a deal. I think it's the unknown of when you get to the infrastructure that hosts that identity or the identity management, the account management for all of those things. It becomes we have to assume everything's compromised, even without proof that it is. And that becomes just really an organizational-wide effort to let's put a big circle around everything that might be a problem and let's start weeding our way in. And that's where the time comes in. That's where the disruption to operations comes in.
As a leader, how do you manage your response to uncertainty? What tools do you use? What strategies do you use? What does that feel like for you? And what do you do about it?
Yeah, so I mean, for me personally, I think it just goes back to what you know to be the next appropriate step. It's a very methodical approach. And so I think one of the biggest responsibilities of somebody in my role in those moments is to keep the culture of the team going. A big thing that people overlook often is that people responding to incidents, they don't drink as much water as they normally do. They don't stop for meal breaks in the way that they normally do. They might work longer hours than they typically would. And so managing the people that are managing the incident becomes almost more important than the technical things that you are doing in that moment. And I think for me, it's really let's work on what we have in front of us. What do we know? What can we do about that thing that we know? And let's keep marching our way forward rather than getting too buried in the what ifs, too buried in the, well, what if they get to this system? What if we find evidence of that? Well, that's going to be a big deal. Trying to stay away from those unknowns and really just narrow our focus on the things that we can control.
You know, I'm kind of seeing that there's really two components that you're leading in a situation like this. One of them has to do with the tech, the incident. Another has to do with the leadership of the people. Yep. And I wonder if you can tell us about what are the most challenging bits of people leadership in a situation like this?
I think the challenging bits are, again, it's how it affects people personally. So a lot of people in cybersecurity start looking at themselves from a personal lens in these moments. How is this going to affect my career? Did I cause this problem from happening? You have initial employees. That might be that initial vector that clicked on a phishing email that kind of kicked the whole process off. There's a lot of blame internally for themselves. So you really want to make sure that you're not exposing those individuals to blame or fault for incidents like that are happening. But I think that component of leadership of the team, the biggest value that you can have is to keep them working, right? Keep them moving, keep them focused on what they're resolving, and realize that you can solve this problem in small pieces. You don't need to think of it as one big issue, just like you wouldn't a 3-year roadmap. Everything gets broken down into manageable pieces, and you work your way forward.
In this particular incident, are we talking hours, days, weeks? What was sort of the duration of that initial block of time?
So I think the core focus, let's kind of work 24/7 trying to contain this issue is a matter of days. Mm-hmm. The immediate remediation and the initial password rotations and kind of the control of the environment is a matter of weeks. But ultimately the investigation, the cleanup, the communication around it all is a matter of months.
Talk to me about those days. Are we talking 24/7 work by the team? How does day 3 differ from day 1 in terms of the team's energy and the way that folks are able to show up?
Yeah, I mean, there's two pieces of it. So for small teams, if you have, let's say, a networking team with only a couple of people, you might only have one real subject matter expert in that space. That person at some point needs to eat, they need to sleep, they need to take a break. And so when you're able to engage with other people on the team, you're able to have handoffs. If you're lucky enough to have shifts regionally across the country or across the world that's engaging, and then you can manage time in that sense. But really, in those first few days, it is 24/7. It's people working, constantly trying to get a handle on things. A lot of it is trying to get a handle on what the problem really is. And so I think while there's a lot of work early on, there's a lot of stress in the moment of trying to kind of get a handle of it. Even after a couple of days, that stress level can start lowering a little bit because you start having an understanding of what you're really dealing with. You maybe start understanding this was compromised, but this wasn't. Or because this is compromised, this is the impact, this is what we need to do next. And that knowledge of what you're going to be dealing with starts lowering that stress level.
Yeah. In this incident and in others that you've seen throughout your career, did you ever see anyone get kind of like to a breaking point?
Yeah, in this particular incident, my cybersecurity team, which was only a few people as a part of a larger IT group, one of the main people that were involved in kind of commanding that incident, documenting, kind of wrangling the people together, actually left the organization a couple of days after the incident happened. So this was a person that was heavily engaged with the team originally, really involved, really good, productive worker, really reliable in that sense. And you could see the stress of the incident from the beginning, that first day, starting to impact the productivity or kind of that engagement from that user. So you'd see little signs of kind of disconnecting from the situation. And then that particular employee did leave the organization during the early stages of the incident. And it's a person that's still in cybersecurity today. It's a person that's still operating in the space. I think the operational incident response side of cybersecurity is different from the governance side, right? There's a lot of places that people fit in, but I think incidents are a really good one to make it clear to people quickly where maybe that stress doesn't work for them.
Yeah, definitely. What was it like for you when this individual kind of stepped away from the organization?
Yeah, I mean, I think some disappointment. Overall, certainly, I had a very heavy role in the managing of the incident itself. So as a subject matter expert in cybersecurity incident response overall and dealing with kind of keeping the team together and moving forward, I already had a very active role in the team. So it's an element of support that was missing. That was certainly disappointing. I felt for the person who had worked really hard to get into this career and really enjoyed working in it. And so seeing how that impacts people is obviously a struggle. But really overall, you can't think about it in the moment. We had a problem that we needed to solve and we needed to keep moving forward. The reflection on those sort of things comes when everything is kind of cleaned up again. The biggest things that will help with stress, with dealing with incidents, is how organizations handle the tone around incident response. Plenty of organizations still to this day will put in a job description, prevent any cybersecurity incidents from happening. And it's that sort of disconnect from reality that I think makes it so difficult for people. If we start all collectively thinking of incidents as an inevitability, something that is going to happen, it's not a matter of if, it's when, and that success is not preventing them from happening entirely, but rather success is containing them effectively, escalating efficiently, organizing and really preventing organizational damage, brand damage, preventing reportable events when you think about PII or any of those sort of things. When success is viewed under that lens, you allow teams to really do a lot more work in the space to try and be successful. Because the only other opportunity is when they're starting working on an incident, they're starting from failure, right? They're starting from, I've already failed, now it's a matter of how much have I failed, rather than, oh, now I have an opportunity to be successful still. And so I think that narrative really changes the tone of how these teams respond.
Michael, we talked a lot about the incident. At this point in time, I kind of want to ask you about some of those what ifs that you brought up. You're in the incident, you're responding, you're containing. What are the what ifs that are running through your head?
So the what ifs generally relate to the outcome, right? What bad thing could happen if we uncover that it's involved in this issue? So for organizations I've come from, that might be customer-facing products. It might be news outlets reporting on some bad event that's going on. It could be the type of data that's lost. And so any number of those things play into the what ifs, because if they actually come to fruition, it will widely change how that particular incident impacted the organization.
Yeah. How about any sort of reflection? And I don't know if this happens in the middle of responding to and containing the incident or afterwards. And what I mean is, an incident occurs in the context of a controls environment and framework. The organization had some controls in place. It didn't have other controls in place. When you reflect on the previous, call it 6 months or 12 months leading up to the event, what do you think about that maybe you wish had gone a little differently?
Yeah, this is one that I revisit a good deal because it relates to priority. So in our particular case, the initial vector was a VPN user account into our organization that wasn't protected with MFA. It's pretty common sense to think about today and look back and say, well, of course you need MFA on those sort of accounts. But when you look at the reality and you're implementing things like single sign-on, or you're patching vulnerabilities, or you're implementing other kind of strategic components of what a roadmap might be, you have to start weighing one against the other. In our particular case, you had network equipment that needed to be updated to support a single sign-on rollout. For us, we were really strong in the user experience side of things. And so we wanted users to only deal with change as infrequently as possible. So they had one way of connecting to a VPN. We're going to change that. That's either implementing MFA or it's implementing single sign-on to achieve MFA. And in our case, the network equipment that we had needed to be upgraded to support the thing that we were trying to do. So we were seeking that perfect implementation, something that would be ideal timing, the least impact to the user to achieve what we were looking for. And during that period of time, while we were waiting to upgrade that particular piece of network equipment, this incident happened. And so it boils down to, if we chose not to take that path, this incident probably would not have happened, or it wouldn't have happened to the same scale that it was. But if you look at other things that we did during that period of time, we might be talking about an incident that happened with those things. So it's not a zero-sum game. It's not something that you can really, in hindsight, look back and say that you would do differently. Certainly today I would do it differently if I could, because I know what the outcome is. Yeah. But I actually discuss this a good amount when I'm in different settings with people, and I look at it as the information I had in the moment. The decision was made purposefully. It was communicated to leadership. It was not in a vacuum. Everyone was on the same page. It was just an unfortunate reality that it was compromised during that time. But in our case, it's kind of that phrase of perfection is the enemy of progress to a degree. And I think we ran into that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what I'm hearing is that there was an intentional decision at one point in time, and it involved a trade-off.
Yep.
And I wonder, how do you make those trade-offs? How do you think about what to balance and what direction to go in?
Yeah, I think those trade-offs were different then in my career than they are now. I think the way that I approach something. Back then, there's a reality of there's a volume of things that we need to do. You might have a list of 20 priorities. This ends up at number 14 instead of number 17 or instead of number 8. It's that trade-off of what volume of value can I add in a given period of time. Today, that's evolved a little bit to be more focused on the common causes of incidents. So I tend to take a more practical approach to how I'm dealing with incidents today, with that focus on this is something that will commonly lead to incidents. That's the priority no matter what. And when you take that kind of lens, what I know now might have changed that decision-making before, but that's really what it boils down to is you have limited resources, you have a lot of stuff that you need to do, and we are picking and choosing.
Yeah. Michael, I wonder if you would tell me about the attack from the attacker's point of view. Yeah. My understanding is that there was social engineering, there was a lack of a multi-factor authentication control, there was VPN account compromise. I wonder if you could kind of describe the incident as you found out what happened from the attacker perspective.
Yeah, so it boils down to a pretty common incident scenario. It's something that started with social engineering, starts with a phishing email, starts with user account compromise. They can uncover VPN endpoints, not all that difficult to understand where users are connecting to VPNs today. They use those same credentials to get into VPN. I mean, when you look at same sign-on or single sign-on, there's a convenience element for employees where you try to have the same set of credentials work in a variety of places. For us, that was an unfortunate reality that same credential that was compromised in email, while the attacker wasn't looking at email from that lens, they took those same credentials and realized those probably work in this other environment for VPN. And when you don't have MFA in place, you run into these kind of downstream risks that we run into. But once that user account is compromised, they start moving laterally through the organization. So you start looking to establish persistence. So you want to make sure that you can get back into the organization if they change an account password or something of that nature. And then you start moving around and you try to elevate permissions. You try to compromise more accounts. In our case, the type of group that it was, they were operating in a quiet way. They were operating in a way to gather information, establish a foothold in the organization for what we believe to be intentions for future actions, compared to something like ransomware that is often I'm going to get in and I'm going to cause damage really quickly because I'm trying to get some result because of that damage really quickly. This sort of issue was quieter. That's why the good thing about that is it had less impact to the organization, at least externally. But what it means is that this bad actor could operate in the environment for months at a time before you really uncover what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Talk to me a little bit about the shift from response to containment. And you've also mentioned that you brought in sort of a third-party specialist. What was it like to shift through those different stages? And what was it like when you brought in a third party?
Yeah, so I think for us, the stages are just the common reality. We're trying to stop the bleeding, so to speak, and then we start getting a handle of what's going on. For us, we brought in that third party because of missing subject matter expertise. We're a small team. You really need niche technical knowledge to understand behavior and understand what a threat actor did in that situation. So for us, there's a couple of good things. When you're dealing with these issues, you never really know if what you're doing is the right thing. I was the leading subject matter expert in cybersecurity for this organization. There wasn't really a person for me to bounce ideas off of, bounce the steps I was taking off of in a meaningful way. They were looking to me to that. And so there's always an element of imposter syndrome or an element of, am I doing the right thing? Do I know what I'm talking about? And that third party coming in, the value they really add is, number one, they can add credence to what you did. They can say, yep, you did everything that you're supposed to do, all the right steps. Now you can start handing things off to other resources. But it's really engaging with people that can provide value to what you're doing. They can provide confirmation to what you're doing and supplement those missing pieces is where the third party comes into for us.
Yeah. And in this particular case, when the third party came in with their specialized skill set and they took a look at what had been done, what there was to do, how did it feel? Did they kind of say, hey, Michael, it looks like you and your team have been going down, a really good path here? Or what was that like? Did they kind of have feedback for you on how things had been handled prior to them showing up?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there were recommendations in forensic analysis and information retention during the process that we maybe missed the mark on or weren't as mature as we could have been in the moment. But in general, they affirmed that everything we did was the right approach, that we contained things effectively, that we were looking at it the right way, that we were communicating and acting quickly, and that we had a lot of material to provide them to really to kick it off. For us at the time, we didn't have an active incident response retainer. So the process of getting a third party into an organization might take a week or two. When you're looking at scheduling, when you're looking at processing purchase orders or approvals of budget or things like that, it took a little bit to get in. So we were able to make a lot of progress during that period of time. So there was a lot for them to weigh that was going well. And I think that is something that is really reassuring for somebody like me in my role, just because it adds some validity to the things that you think you know.
Yeah. Oh, I can feel a lightness in my chest just listening to you retell the story of what it felt like to be a little bit validated by these folks who, my understanding is day in and day out, this is what they do. Yeah. And they're in all sorts of organizations looking at all sorts of messes. And for them to have said to you, you did a good job. I imagine that feels nice.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Now, you had mentioned, Michael, that there was an individual on the team who, there was a lot of stress. and maybe shortly after the incident, they said, you know what? I think it's time for me and the organization to part ways. If you could kind of go back in time, is there anything that you might have done differently to try and support this individual in a different way?
During the incident, I wouldn't say so. I think when you're in those moments, you really are all eyes on the common goal. You have to solve a problem that is a really critical problem to the organization. And so when you're in that moment, trying to support the user feeling or the instant responder kind of feeling in the moment isn't there. I think what I could have done is spend more time proactively trying to prepare those individuals for what that might feel like. For me, I had prior incident response experience, so I've gone through similar things in the past. So that was very helpful. I kind of had an idea of what to expect, and sometimes just knowing that everything comes to an end eventually is helpful. No matter how bad it feels in the moment, you'll get past it, you'll solve the problem, it will eventually be over with. Just knowing that helps a lot. And I think for these folks that didn't have that prior experience, preparing them proactively for that, talking through it, tabletop exercises to a degree, I think might have helped prevent that sort of outcome. But in the moment, certainly I don't think so.
Yeah. Thank you so much. You know, I'm wondering about this trade-off that you described to us. It seemed like there was a value and a benefit associated with relatively little end user friction, that there was a tolerance for a certain amount of change at a given time. If you could rewind the clock and do it all over again, would you have tried to do the MFA before the network device upgrade? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think just knowing the environment of that organization, I don't know that I would have been successful with a different outcome. I think the leadership priority was really on as little friction for the end user as possible. Anything that might be perceived as an impact to productivity of that end user or dissatisfaction in some way, I think was taken with a higher value than some organizations take that. And so in our particular case, I certainly, knowing what I know today, would make different recommendations. I would, without a doubt, I would say if you don't have MFA, multi-factor authentication on a VPN or an external kind of entry point into an organization, that's one of, if not the most critical things that you need to deal with. And so knowing the precedence on how that plays into incidents, I would have approached it a little bit differently. I'm willing to bet I would have gotten similar pushback. I would have gotten similar emphasis on user experience that I don't know that the result would have been different. That's kind of the way that I would approach it.
Are there any other reflections or any other sort of transition from one phase to the next that we haven't covered yet?
I think it's really just a matter of playing into, there's always more to do than you're able to do. So I think you might look to executive presence and decision making, like my example of employee experience. It's easy to look at those things as flawed judgment. But I think when you're weighing a wide variety of things, when you're patching vulnerabilities, there's always going to be more than you're able to handle in a given period of time, especially with small teams and limited budgets that everyone always seems to have. It's never perfect. And so looking at it in hindsight with, if only I solved this problem, we'd prevent something, is ignoring the value that we place on everything else. And so I think it's easy to look at a singular event as a failure of a program that makes it easy to ignore all the great successes and value of a program that was brought in the same period of time. So we are judged a lot by what goes wrong. I think we should be judged more and more by what doesn't go wrong because of all of the other things that are in place.
Michael, it's time for us to talk about lessons learned. I wonder if you could go back in time and give yourself some advice during the incident. Is there anything you would tell yourself?
Yeah, I think the main piece of advice, and it comes with experience going through these incidents, is that all bad things eventually will come to an end, right? So in the moment, you don't recognize that. You think it's your new normal, so to speak, and eventually they go away, and eventually things go back. Your schedule becomes the same. You get past it. You go back to the normal tasks that you had. And I think just that realization allows people to get through it.
Michael, we talked about kind of a little bit of an unfortunate mindset that gets sort of automatically placed onto information security incidents, which is there's so much darn attention on stuff when it goes poorly. but maybe not as much attention as there should be when things go well. And I wonder if you could kind of tell us about a vision or a philosophy for a different way of looking at this kind of thing.
Yeah, in general, I mean, I think the cybersecurity industry overall has a big burnout problem. It has a big problem retaining staff. It has a big problem bringing people into the industry and the field. And a lot of that comes down to the microscope that people are under for the work that they do. When you look at a cybersecurity program in an organization, there might be tens of hundreds of things that you're doing, controls that you're implementing, events or incidents that you're preventing, things that you're doing great work with. And when you are judged only by the failures, the lapses in that program, and not given credit for all of the successes and the times that you prevented it from happening, it's demotivating to teams overall. And so I think when people start thinking of that and they start changing their mindset towards the positive, not the negative, realizing that a team like mine needs to control every potential risk to an organization. We need to manage every control. We need to manage every potential risk or kind of entry point into the organization. A bad actor needs to find the one time that we didn't. They need to find the one thing that we missed. And so it's already a losing battle. And I think when you lose the support internally to an organization and they're focused too much on the negative, it's really difficult to really make progress continually as you move forward.
What kind of advice do you have for information security leaders and information security teams in terms of burnout prevention?
So I think burnout prevention comes down to focus on the things that you can control. There will always be things in this field that you can't control. I mean, user behavior is a big component of the negative issues that we dealt with. The incident we talked about today was ultimately driven at the initial standpoint by a user that did the wrong thing. It's just a reality of what happens. And so if you focus on what you can control, if you focus on the successes that you have and the value that you're bringing to the organization, look at incidents more as an inevitability than something that you can prevent entirely, and rather shift your focus to how can you manage that incident in a successful way. It lets you work your way through those sort of problems while still being able to be successful, while still being able to look at it and say, you know what, I did a great job with what we're doing here. It's not an immediate failure because of the fact that it exists.
Michael, one of the things that I learned about you and this organization, it sounds like you as a security leader, you were really on the same page with leadership with regards to change and culture, and therefore some level of risk tolerance. And I wonder if you have any advice in terms of how to get there, how to get that alignment in terms of culture and risk tolerance so that you can feel really aligned in terms of the decisions and the trade-offs that are being made.
Yeah, ultimately, it's about awareness. I mean, if you look at a cybersecurity leader's job, the number one thing for them to do is to understand the risks that exist in an organization and explain it in such a way that leaders in that organization can make informed decisions. That's really what it boils down to. And I think if you take that approach and if you start tailoring it a little bit to how does it add business value, how is it impacting the business, what risks to the organization overall come into play, you can get a lot of buy-in from leaders that way. But ultimately, for me, and the way that I look at it, the way I would address things differently is just thinking about progress, not perfection, right? There's a lot to do. Again, you don't need to be perfect. The user experience, you can have stages of rollouts of things. And when you focus, particularly in an incident space, on really the driver common causes of incidents, that might change your focus a little bit also, because ultimately the guidance and the awareness and the recommendations becomes practical advice, not kind of pipe dreams of new technology.
Michael, thank you so much for joining me today. This was super fun.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is the Wake Up Podcast by Veeam, the global leader in data resilience.